Welcome and thank you for joining us. We'll get rolling in just a couple of minutes here. Okay, I'm going to get rolling. Hello and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Unleashing Developer and Cloud Ops Superpowers by Boosting Productivity with Next Level Infrastructure. I'm your host. My name is Anirban Chatterjee. I do product marketing here at Rafay Systems, and I'm very excited to be joined by Steve Griffith from Microsoft, and we'll give you a formal introduction and welcome in just a moment, Steve. Before we get there, I do want to quickly go over some housekeeping items first. All of you that are participating, thank you for joining us. You will be on mute for the duration of the presentation, but you will be able to submit questions in your Zoom panel. So if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to type them in there and I will see them pop up on my screen here, and we'll try to leave some time at the end to get to those. The session will also be recorded and shared publicly and widely. If you would like to share this session with one of your colleagues or one of your friends, you're more than welcome to do that at the conclusion, because we will make this recording available on our website for anyone to consume downstream. And finally, as I mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions as we go through this session, please send them in to us and we will address them at the end. I'm very, very pleased to have Steve Griffith joining me today. Steve is a cloud architect and principal specialist at Microsoft. He works on the Azure team, on their global black belt team, actually. Steve, welcome.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks.
I'd love to give you just a few minutes to give us a sense of what you do at Microsoft and what led you to this point.
Yeah,
so we know
sure.
where you're coming from.
Yeah, so the global black belt team are a group of technical specialists in various areas. My group is the App Innovation GBB team. We focus on modern app development, which is pretty broad bucket of solutions. I tend to specialize largely in Kubernetes environments. And prior to being on this team, I started with Accenture, so about almost 20 years ago, excuse me, at this point. I was at Accenture building software for the insurance industry. So I worked with a company that, it spun off of Accenture eventually, but what's now called Duck Creek is the group that I came from. And we basically built insurance claims processing and policy systems for various insurers around the world. And in part of that role, I built the underlying architecture. So I worked with the team that owned the underlying technical architecture of that solution. I eventually ran the SaaS engineering team for Duck Creek. So when they started selling that as a SaaS solution, and that kind of led me into Azure, which then led me to Microsoft. So I came over and I did, some of you who are familiar with Microsoft might be familiar with our customer success organization. So worked with customers to help them be successful on Azure. And then that kind of led me into the GBB team, right? Because I was starting to specialize more in Kubernetes, and that's where I am now. And most of the work that I do these days in Kubernetes is helping customers build, large application hosting environments, developer solutions to enable developers to do cool things in Azure and in Kubernetes.
So it feels like, the insurance industry is very established, right? And they often are on the lagging end of technology changes. And it feels like you've probably had a front row seat in watching that industry go from a we're never going to put our data in the cloud mindset to the cloud is our future mindset. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I had my fair share of COBOL copybooks that I had to sift through in my early days of kind of integration development. Lots of old mainframe work and integrating the mainframe, performance testing, code against mainframe, lots of fun things like that. I think there's a couple, I won't name them specifically, but there's a couple insurance companies that came around maybe 10, 15 years ago that really started to push the envelope in the insurance industry. I think that Now it's a bit more cutting edge than it was back then. There was definitely more risk averse previously, but I have seen more recently, getting a little more exciting in the insurance space. And you can probably guess what the main insurance companies are that are driving that innovation. They're probably the ones that have the best mobile apps that you're using
Right.
and so forth. So yeah, they definitely start pushing things. But yeah, in the early days, it was absolutely a bit of a struggle over there.
Have you seen a greater degree of influence and relevance and power that the IT organization, the development organizations have had in these companies that maybe they didn't have 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I think developers in particular, I think that, with all of the amazing new technologies coming out to enable developers, the list goes on and on, the features there that developers are tapping into, AI, obviously, and so forth. I think that it's given developers a front row, really the steering wheel in a lot of cases, to do really amazing things, where you can build a proof of concept in a couple hours on some new demo that you just caught on, a live stream or something like that. Show it to executives, and it can change the direction of the company. And then you have the IT ops crew that has to enable those scenarios and give the developers that room to move in a safe way that still protects the enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you, I've been in IT for over 20 years now, and I've definitely I talked to a ton of executives at the CIO level on down, and there's definitely been a shift of mentality around a belief that developers are going to be the innovation engine for the company, and IT is going to be an innovation engine for the company. Whereas in the not too distant past, IT was a cost center. IT was a room full of servers that I was forced to pay for because I needed to have something running my backend database. And now any company that wants to innovate and be relevant for their customers needs to have IT as a core part of the innovation conversation, and developers as well. I've seen that happen over and over and over again. And so I think,
absolutely.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even with, and you look at the more recent like supply chain attacks and things like that are happening, where IT really is critical. You don't even necessarily realize where some of these attack vectors are coming from. And IT needs to be prepared for that, while at the same time giving developers, again, that room to move, to do these cool things. So yeah.
So in terms of giving them the room to move, right, we're talking really about productivity at the end of the day, right? We're talking about giving developers the ability to code and deliver new capabilities for the business. And I think everybody would agree that that is a charter they should have, and they should be investing in that charter. But there are things today that provide unnecessary friction, and they don't enable the efficiency and the productivity that the developers need. Are there some examples of that you've come across in your conversations with the customers that you deal with on a daily basis?
Oh, constantly. Yeah, all the time. Things that, you can go out and spin up, say, an Azure subscription, or name your preferred cloud provider. You can create, an environment in those clouds, typically with a couple button clicks, and you're good to go. And then you can pretty much do whatever you want. But suddenly you try to do the same thing into an enterprise hardened environment where, say on the Azure side, you have Entra ID, formerly Azure Active Directory, and someone just, did the right security configuration settings on there that made things a little bit safer, or maybe a lot safer with these configuration changes, but completely kiboshed the ability to do some fundamental things within Azure. So for example, something as simple as provisioning an AKS cluster. I can go do that in a test subscription, with one quick command. But if I'm in a hardened environment where I can't automatically grant user rights and things like that, which AKS will try to do on your behalf if you can, you can't even create an AKS cluster. You can't create this environment or that tool, right? These things are locked down. Hey, you have an environment where you're not allowed to create public IPs. Well, if you're in the public cloud and you're trying to use public services, you're going to be blocked from creating public IPs, and suddenly you're completely handcuffed. So, getting to a place where you have subscriptions or whatever the mechanism is to allow those things in a safe place where developers can just play around is fundamental, and something we run into all the time.
It feels like there's two extremes to that spectrum, right? On the one hand, you have developers that are maybe given too much permission and power, and as a result, they are doing potentially risky things in the environments where their applications are being developed or tested or even put into production. And on the other side, you have the fear of that being so high that operations has things locked down so tightly that they can't even get access to the network in the way that they need
Right.
in order for their application to work. And it feels like
Yeah.
that middle ground is really hard to find, right?
It is, and I see it from both sides. I can name customers. I wouldn't name customers, but I have customers that, hey, they've gone off and built these extensive environments. The developers went out, they had the access to do whatever they wanted without restriction, and now we're in a process of kind of reverse engineering that with IT ops and security, saying, okay, well, here's what they did. Here's what the policies are. Now let's find the happy place in the middle. But that's a lot of work. And then there's the other side where, again, someone just wanted to try something and couldn't even try it. So didn't have the opportunity to innovate, that they could have done something amazing, but they were completely blocked. So yeah, you're right. You have to find that middle ground. And we see it from both sides.
I've also heard of tons of cases. We've talked to a ton of customers, as you can imagine, who have told us that the operations team actually wants to be helpful, and they actually want to help the developers get access to what they need. But there's because they've tried to sort of re-centralize the IT management so that there's a bit more standardization across the board, that operations team now becomes a bottleneck, right? So they have a ticket queue that's a mile long, and they're getting to them as quickly as they can. But at the same time, because there's no prescribed standards for each individual configuration, there's a lot of customization that they have to do for every single request, which just bogs them down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like taking off an airplane. When you're going to take off, you want all those proper security checks. People in the plane, they want to get where they're going as fast as possible, but we need to find ways to make sure that it's done in a safe way. And there's a lot more checks than people realize. Things, your average developer has no idea the complexities of, say, certificate management and doing that properly, so that your users have good experience and the environment is safe. Those things come up all the time.
Should developers need to have to worry about some of the finer grained details of the infrastructure, like certificates, for example?
I think that debate has been going on for as long as developers have existed and IT ops has existed. I like developers to understand it. When I was a developer, I wanted to understand it personally, but you have to also recognize that some developers really just want to code. They love the craft of coding. They want to just focus on that area, and they don't want to care about how ingress works. They don't want to care about how egress and certificates and all those things work. That's not something that excites them. I always tell people, if they're interviewing for a job, I'm meeting someone, I say, what is it that keeps you up at night in a good way? Like what books are you reading? What makes you excited about your job? And that's where I think people should focus. And it's the same with developers. If your passion is in the beauty of the code and the way that the code is written, you may not care about those things. So, I think it's important for developers to have some fundamental understanding, but I don't think they should need to. They should be protected from the need to really get in great depth about it.
Yeah, and I've actually seen organizations struggling with that, with finding that balance, because there are developers like the ones you just described who have a passion for technology, obviously, but don't want that to get in the way of working on what they want to work on. Have you also seen instances where developers are spending 50%, 60%, sometimes more time on just basic like tech stack management stuff and not coding stuff? Is there a number that comes to mind?
Yeah, especially with Kubernetes, because we've kind of opened up Pandora's box there a bit. I think one of the most valuable things that Kubernetes brought was this API specification that kind of created this common language that IT ops and developers could all speak. And people now, if you're a developer for Kubernetes, you probably know what ingress is, but you may not necessarily know all the internal details of it. So so I think that there's still definitely that struggle. I believe that in some areas we've simplified a little bit with this, kind of common language that we can all speak now. But I think there's still room to grow. And there's been a ton of solutions out there that have made an attempt to simplify it even further. For creating additional languages that continue that abstraction away from what developers need to understand. I think there's the open application model that Microsoft published several years back, which didn't really go too far, but it was a similar kind of idea of like, hey, this is the language for the ops team and this is the language for the developers, and open application model was intended to kind of bring those two together. So I think that's still kind of something that's being solved.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of attempts over the years to solve this problem, and the problem sort of has morphed over time. I think these days there's this term that is becoming more and more popular called platform engineering, and creating platform teams to do platform engineering. And part of their mandate and we work with these teams a lot. Part of their mandate is to help with the centralization and standardization of these core functions of the cloud so that developers can have access to that. But it takes a serious amount of investment to not only build the team and the skills, but also the infrastructure and technology that's required to do that. And so there's a lot of investment that needs to happen. So I bring that up because in order to get big investments, you need to basically show how that investment is going to help the business. And it's helpful, I think, to understand how not solving those problems can impact the business. And these things might seem obvious if you think about it for 5 seconds, but I've talked to a lot of operations people, and I'm sure you have as well, that don't often put that hat on when they're trying to just lay out why they want to solve this problem. Have you seen that happen in your conversations with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Things like, the one that jumps out at me that I think a lot of people don't really think about is, the hiring and retention point there. I always think that's interesting because you want happy, excited, brilliant developers in your organization. And to get those people, you need to have an exciting environment for them to work in. You need to have the tools that they want to use. You don't want to, get this amazing new, college graduate who, is a brilliant developer and throw them into something that's just going to bog them down and make them sad. You want them to be excited. And I think that, that's key to that. And developer cognitive load is kind of what we discussed already as well, right? Is that, some developers don't want to have to deal with, thinking about all this infrastructure and how the cluster runs and what components come together to make it all work. So, finding that balance does have a huge impact on, how overall as an environment, you're successful and keeping people engaged.
Why do you think executives care? I've heard because you bring this up as a pain point for them and a problem they want to solve. Why do executives at the top level care about cognitive load for developers?
Well, I think that, again, you want to give developers that space that they can innovate. And if you're caught up in just running through the same process every day, if you get in at 8, 9 a.m. and start just kind of working through the plumbing that you need to do the part that you want to do, then you're not going to get a chance to innovate. Like, you want to have that space in the day to say, hey, go out and watch some streams from the latest developer conference, whatever it may be, KubeCon, and take those ideas and bring them in, and let's kick the tires. Back when I was at Duck Creek, at Accenture, I think the thing I was most well known for was that I was keeping up with these things and bringing these ideas, and it would just be a hallway demo. Like, some executive would come by and I said, hey, have you seen this? And I would do a demo for them, and it would kind of minds blown, and hey, let's put some focus on that. You need to have that space, and so having that cognitive load relaxed a bit gives the developers that room to think about those things. In fact, I would be sitting at my desk working, and they'd be having an executive conference. All the execs would be in, and they'd say, hey, look, we're taking a lunch break. Just, can you come show something cool? We're bored, come show something that you found that's cool. And I would go in and demo something. And again, the gears would start turning, ideas would start popping up. And that's where all the new cool features were coming from, right?
Yeah, that speaks directly to the culture of innovation that these companies are trying to build for their people and for their business, and not being able to give IT and developers the room to move and the agility directly impacts their growth, right? That it impacts their ability to grow as a business, unlock new opportunities, serve their customers, and on and on and on. And I think those are the downstream impacts that, if you can prove that you can affect those impacts and improve those impacts on the business, that's going to make it much more likely that you'll be able to get the resources, the people, the dollars, the time to invest in solving these productivity problems for IT and for developers.
Yeah, even just word of mouth. Hey, I'm a developer for such and such, and I love what I'm doing, right? Okay, my friends that I meet at conferences or whatever are going to say, well, that's a place that I want to be.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the key things that platform teams, IT teams can invest in to actually address these productivity issues. And we'll just go down these one by one, and we've talked about these before, so obviously you've got a perspective. The first one was an IDP, a developer portal, that allows developers to just kind of get point and click access to infrastructure. Have
Yeah.
you seen those used by your customers that are successful?
Yeah, quite a bit. And there's varying degrees of kind of complexity of those IDPs. I mean, sometimes, customers will say, hey, we'll just use the native cloud provider portal, so the Azure portal, whatever it may be, for that. Or it's like, hey, we have so many kind of customizations. We have our own experience that we know our developers are comfortable with and happy with, that we're going to build something specific to them. So I see those pretty frequently.
Do you also see a lot of cases, because I've heard this come up with our customers as well, is that they do want the developers to be able to point and click to request things, but at the end, but they still want that ticket to be created and for operations to actually action that ticket. But a lot of that workflow has been automated in the back end by the system. That's still, I would say, a developer self-service experience, because they are still just, they're not having to write a long email with config. They're just basically clicking a button and waiting an hour versus 2 weeks, right?
Right. It can be something as simple as, I have a lot of customers that are building IDPs that have like t-shirt sizing for environments. Like a developer might not need to know that they're running on this specific type of hardware with this GPU configuration. They might just want to drop down list that says, hey, yeah, this is the size roughly that I want. And I don't need the details beyond that. But yeah, and then the back end, it's essentially just, kicking off, a bicep template in Azure, or sending something over to ServiceNow where someone can actually go and provision that in whatever way they do that.
Which leads us directly to the second one, which is these golden path configurations. I've heard golden path, I've heard paved road, but they both kind of mean the same thing, which is just like, here's a configuration that we have created that we know is compliant, that we know is safe, that we know is secure. And there's a few different versions with different levels of resource and levels of permission that a developer could use to get their work done.
Yeah, some call it golden pipeline, whatever it may be, and there's so many variations on it. But ultimately, what it translates to is, we know that the world right now has supply chain concerns, like supply chain security issues that need to be dealt with. So creating that configuration end to end that takes you from the developer's local environment doing a commit and push to code running in a test environment, but every step along there is certified and checked, and you have signing of images, all that fun stuff that you might need, all kind of laid out. So you're simplifying it for the developer that, hey, if you point to this repo and commit your code, the rest is going to happen for you, and you don't have to be concerned about that.
What would you say to the
our
developer?
audit and compliance people, our audit and compliance people are happy too, because when they go to pull a report, they know, okay, yeah, this has all the checks that we expect.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to the developer or the operations person who would be concerned about the loss in flexibility by having just like a firmly defined configuration that they have to hew to?
Well, I think fortunately for those who are developing in the Kubernetes ecosystem, Kubernetes has provided a lot of tools that simplify that. So I would say, hey, if you're concerned about that flexibility, work with your IT crew on, hey, what options do I have to simplify this, right? I mean, can I have lower environments, kind of dev test environments, where I have that flexibility? Hey, look, I just want to literally run kubectl against a cluster, and I want to see everything. I want to be able to get logs. I want to do all the crazy things that I could do with Kubernetes. Carve out that place to let them do that and say, okay, once you've kind of gotten comfortable with that, okay, now just point your repo at the right place, right? So you're still using the same code repo, but now we're going to switch to maybe a different branch, and that branch is connected to your GitHub action that then drives, the golden path, whatever you prefer to call it, right? So having that, it involves usually branch management, having that isolation to not trigger those things when you don't want them. And hey, I'm just going to work in this kind of local dev or, dev test subscription setup.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that centralized governance that we've alluded to a couple of times here, because that's also a key component of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So centralized governance from, really the full pipeline. I mean, it's such a broad scenario, but, governance of your repositories, whatever that may be, Azure DevOps, GitHub, all these various solutions out there that you can tap into. And then centralized governance of your cloud providers, the environments that are deployed there, and what's permitted, what policies are allowed, governance of identity and access. So hey, if a developer wants to deploy something that's going to talk to an Azure Active Directory integrated service, how do they get that identity provisioned? Right, keeping that all in one place that both administrators can see and integrate with and operate with, but developers also have visibility to understand kind of what's going on as well.
I think there's been a bit of a pendulum, right, of like decentralizing, decentralizing, and I think we're always trying to find the right balance between the two, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like today there is a desire to give developers as much autonomy as possible in the resource that they're able to request and use, but have some guardrails for them that are centrally defined by the business based on their unique regulatory requirements, based on their location or their business needs or their customer requirements, that are defined by the people who understand them best in the security world and the finance world, but still allow the flexibility for developers. I don't think that requirement's going away anytime soon, right?
No, I don't think so. I think, in fact, the tooling, to your point, has made it a lot easier, right? And so I'm looking at on the Azure side, we have management groups that allow you to separate subscriptions of, hey, this management group is for production and this management group is for dev test, and you can have completely separate policies between the two of them. So, hey, in dev test, you can create public IPs, and in prod, you can't. Or different templates for cluster configurations, right? So, hey, this dev test cluster allows you to use beta features, this one does not, right? Or this one uses pod security policy, this doesn't, right? All those different things can be separated to give you that flexibility. So it's centralized from an overall governance perspective, but appears almost decentralized from an end user perspective.
Yeah, let's talk about that transition from dev to production, because that's a key one that comes up a lot. I mean, when we start talking to customers, this often comes up as a pain point. The span of time that is needed to take an application or service that is done and developed and ready to go for all intents and purposes, but still needs to go through this process to migrate from this dev test environment into a production environment that's hardened and secure and isolated, because there's so many differences, right? Building that pipeline is probably key best practice as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And having the right reporting coming off of those to see, hey, we allow this thing in dev, but let's audit and report on it so that we can be aware that these things need to be adjusted before we try to go to QA, for example, right? Hey, we allow these creation of public IPs, where we allow this feature, but you need to make sure you clean that up before you get to the next stage. And that's definitely a big component of it, having that visibility into what those things are. You always want to know what prod should look like, even if you're being, your restrictions have been relaxed in whatever environment you are in.
What kind of steps can a platform team take if they're trying to streamline that process and make it as easy as possible and as quick as possible to go from dev to prod? Because I imagine that is a key thing holding back rapid iteration. Like if you solve that, then you can iterate much faster, right? So how would you go about streamlining that process?
Yeah, I think it's having some dashboard, some view of, hey, what those things are that you're taking advantage of, those features, and what again, the audit reports of those things, so you can just have that on your plan. It certainly helps being in the container ecosystem, because from a container perspective, you're well isolated in most cases, but you're always going to come up with things that are not permitted. So I think the most critical thing is having those processes in place, having the reports in place, so that you can make that transition. Automating those things through GitHub issues or whatever tooling you leverage, so that you can get those reports and resolve them early on. But again, you still want the flexibility to try those features out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you led me to my final point here, which is automated workflows. If you're able to automate some portions of these repeatable daily processes, you're able to increase efficiency across the board. And that's true for automation everywhere, but it's particularly true here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Automating it, and I think that ties also back to the IDP side, right? I mean, if you're giving developers, an interface that they can interact with, then you're starting to, maybe you allow certain flags in there, but again, you give them visibility at the IDP side. But in the end, it's all going to trigger some automation that's going to help kind of clean things up, get things in the right structure, make sure all the right checks are in place, make sure all the right identities are there. So the developer shouldn't really need to worry about that, right? So a good example would be, hey, if I'm writing a service, I'm going to use a service account, but then I want that service to call some external system. So maybe I'm going to use a managed identity from my cloud provider to make that call, right? So in Azure, it'd be a managed identity, and using things like workload identity federation to create that linkage between the service account and this managed identity. That can all be part of a workflow, right? So as you're creating this environment for the developers, you automatically provision those identities that you expect to need, and you automatically create that federation to the service account. And the developers are just working with the service account at that point. They have no idea that all of this other automation happened behind the scenes that made sure that
right.
managed identity was created, it was put in the right user group. That user group has the right conditional access permissions, all that crazy stuff that, that helps the IT people feel comfortable.
Yeah, it's magical elves as far as they're concerned, but there's
Yeah.
so much happening behind the scenes that's just kind of hidden from that. And it allows a small but mighty IT operations team to handle any kind of growth or scale a business decides to put into their cloud as they grow, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to quickly, this isn't going to be a Rafay centric webinar, but I would be remiss if I didn't do a quick plug for us. If you've hung with us for this long, I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that we have a platform for this. It's called the Cloud Automation Platform, and it provides within it tooling and solutions for basically everything that Steve and I have been talking about for the last half hour or so. Basically, what we do is we provide the ability for developers and cloud operations teams to provide AI and ML workbenches as a service, clusters and namespaces, and landing zones for applications where they can basically click a button and either provide a very, very tight operations workflow or even just a fully automated pipeline to deploy these things basically on demand for developers, while automating a lot of the things that have to happen on the back end so that these things happen safely and securely and in a scalable way. Things like role-based access control being set up for each individual request as needed, automating network policy, automating add-ons and managing the add-ons, handling multi-tenancy and setting up namespaces and doing backup and restore and auditing network policy. All of those things are basically built into our platform. And it allows platform teams to build a lot of management and automation and streamlining into the system so that workflows can happen very, very quickly from a developer perspective. So they're never waiting for infrastructure. They're always able to get access immediately and they can code. It works across basically every cloud. Obviously, Microsoft is a big partner of ours, and I'm really thankful, Steve, that you're here with us. One question that we get a lot is about this multi-cloud strategy that a lot of our customers are trying to adopt because they may already have a private cloud or a data center. They're trying to adopt public cloud. Maybe they're trying to adopt multiple public clouds. But it's difficult, as I'm sure you've seen in your interactions with customers, to maintain coherency and standards across that entire environment because every cloud is a little bit different and does things a little bit differently. I know you've had a chance to play with our platform. How do you see that? How do you see that challenge resolving for our customers? How are they working to resolve these challenges?
Yeah, I think it's probably where I spend at least half of my time is working with customers who are managing these multi-cloud environments. Because the reality is we have GKE, we have AKS, we have EKS. They're all Kubernetes managed services, but they're, I wouldn't say fundamentally different, but there are significant differences between the approach that each provider takes to those environments and how we manage Kubernetes and the goal that we have to what we deliver to our customers. So there's definitely complexity in that transition, and most of the customers that I'm working with are running across at least two of them, if not all three. And not to mention there's plenty of others out there that are providing Kubernetes managed services as well. So I mean, things like the obvious items are like storage configurations and things like that. So different storage providers across the clouds, key vault, securing keys and things like that. It's going to be a little bit different between the clouds and solving that. So that's a big challenge, is coming up with, okay, what is that I don't want to say lowest common denominator, but what is that common denominator that we can all operate under? And so having a solution that adds a layer of abstraction to give that distinction, to say, hey, look, doesn't really matter what the backend hosting platform is. The IT ops and the developer experience is largely going to be the same, and this platform will handle those these variations between the two. Whether that's, hey, in this environment we have we bring our own operating system template, right? We bring our own image for the nodes. And in this one, we have a managed node that we don't have the access to do that operating system image, right? Like having the ability to say, here's the template for EKS, and here's the template for AKS, and here's the template for GKE. But what the user sees is just, give me a Kubernetes cluster, right? Or give me the environment to run my application. I think that's, where solutions like Rafay really help a lot. And we see a lot of customers that end up building that themselves. And it's nice to have, a product out there that, enables that scenario for them without having to build and maintain that code themselves.
Yeah, and we actually have a number of joint customers that are basically doing exactly that, with Azure software and with our software in concert. And I think this problem is going to be continue to exist for the foreseeable future because no one's ever going to have just one cloud. They're running in multiple geographies. They're running both. Some data needs to stay private. Some data is only workable in a scalable public environment like Azure. And being able to have that flexibility on an ongoing basis is really important for a lot of growing enterprises. So I'm sure you've seen. That's about it for content. We did have a little bit for Q&A. I did see one question that came in that I was going to pose to you, Steve. And
Sure.
the question is basically, how can operations keep up with providing the latest capabilities provided by Azure and other clouds to developers? And I think this question is around, when you're defining these like configurations, these golden path templates and blueprints that define the configurations that are usable by developers. Like, how do you provide that level of protection and level of access to the latest features that Azure can provide?
Yeah. So, what I generally recommend to our customers is at the subscription level, making sure that you've carved out that environment where developers can just play around without risk of impacting the rest of the enterprise, without risk of impacting network security and other things, right? So I mentioned earlier, we have things like management groups, like, okay, here's the set of subscriptions that are for dev test. And we're going to be pretty open with what happens there, but there is no connectivity between those to what's in production, what we need to be protecting over here. And some of that, unfortunately, it will have to come back to the developers like, hey, well, don't put our secure data into dev test. So having solutions that help with that, but starting with having that separation and those differentiations and what templates you provide and what features you allow developers to customize is very critical to that that opportunity. And then being able to lock it down on the other side. So I think that starting there helps a lot. But then I think at the same time, tracking what's being used and getting those signals from the developers of, hey, we're seeing a bit more increased usage of, say, Azure container apps or something like that, or whatever the solution is. Some new product drops and you start to look at that and, hey, we're seeing a lot more of that. Like, what's happening there? Maybe reach out to the developers and say, hey, we're seeing some of this out here. Is this something that you're using? Explain to us how you're using it. Is this something we should be looking to enable in production? And having that open conversation. That's not a conversation where you're kind of beating the developers down, like, you can't use this because we haven't certified it. It's like, okay, well, yeah, you need to certify it, but let's give them the space to figure those things out, and let's start to explore what certification looks like for those products. And definitely reach out to your cloud providers too, because one of the big parts of my role is someone says to me, hey, we have developers who are trying to use product X. We don't have any idea how to secure this thing. How do we do that? And that's where we can say, okay, well, here's what we're seeing. Let's get you in the loop with the engineering team to figure out how we can make this successful. Because a lot of times that'll actually even drive product features back. It's like, hey, we're seeing a lot of customers that have this compliance requirement, and this solution doesn't work with that. So when is that going to be available? Let's get that in the backlog for the product for that customer. So having that open communication both with the developers and what they're using, but also with your cloud providers, your account teams, on how do we get these things secured the way that we need them to for our enterprise.
And I'll add, just from our perspective, we've had a number of customers where early in their engagement with us, one of the reasons that they started talking to us in the first place is because when they had their existing Kubernetes management vendor, that vendor was not able to keep pace with the level of innovation that a vendor like Microsoft Azure was doing. And so there were these features that Azure would release that would have an enormous lag time before they are supported by other vendors. And in order to get that support, they would have to deploy a software update to a controller somewhere, and there's probably multiple controllers in the environment, and that would cause delays, and maybe there was some instability because you had to roll things off and back on and on and on and on. So one of the big pain points that caused customers to come to us is because we have that centralized controller and we're a SaaS platform. So we are very, very tightly integrated with your product teams and your engineering teams. So we try to support Azure's features pretty much as soon as they come out, along with all of our other cloud partners. And so our customers then are able to get that level of support pretty much immediately without worrying about the stability impacts of taking a downtime on a controller to do an update or having to wait, really. So
I think that's critical, because I wouldn't bash any specific products, but that is something we commonly see: customers leaving solutions because they're stuck a year behind on, say, Kubernetes version or something like that. I mean, that is unfortunately a reality. Certification's hard. Certifying new Kubernetes versions, and they drop very frequently. And for pretty much all open source products, these things are iterating rapidly, and keeping up with that's difficult. So you have to find vendors that are willing to and able to keep up and get you the latest and greatest, so that you can take advantage of those features.
Absolutely. Steve, it was an absolute pleasure spending the last 40 or so minutes with you. I hope we have an opportunity to do it again sometime soon.
Yeah,
for our
absolutely.
audience, I would just like to say, there's a couple of things you can do. If you would like to learn more about Rafay, you can sign up for a demo using the link that's on the screen right now. If you'd rather do a free trial, we have a link for that as well. Either way, I hope that you enjoyed the time that you spent with Steve and I today. And if you think that a colleague would find this discussion useful for whatever projects they're working on in platform engineering, please share this webinar with them. Steve, once again, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And for the rest of you, have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.